At the beginning, it was pretty scary, actually, to
Yeah,
see the whole industry, not just your event, but an entire industry go down to, I think I saw back last Easter, I think they said the business events industry globally was at 2% capacity.
Good morning to the Exhibition News podcast, videocast. Today we're talking to Carina Bauer, who is the newly elected chairman of the AEO, which in some ways is quite unusual because Carina is only the second woman to have actually been elected chairman of the AEO, and the AEO has existed for 100 years. What do you think that tells us about the trade show industry, Carina?
Well, I think the trade show industry reflects wider society, really. Maybe we've taken a little bit longer to get there in terms of representation of women at the top of the trade show industry, but it has been largely male dominated for most of that 100 years, and many industries have been. So I think it's important for us to recognise that, and that was quite normal 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and we just have to move forward positively. Obviously, coming up behind me is Julie Driscoll as well. So she'll be the third female chair next year. So I think that has a great sort of sign for the industry, and there are many fantastic women leading major trade show companies now. So it's just really about engagement and making sure that they're taking part in the volunteer aspects as well of the industry, and making sure that their voices are heard.
Yeah, you and I have been talking about how you actually got into the industry, and of course you are incredibly unusual because you took PPE at Oxford, and I think, having sort of analysed the industry myself for many years, I've only, I think, ever come across 3 people in the history of the trade show company who were at Oxbridge. So how did you get from Oxbridge to the trade show industry when that is really very, very unusual?
Yes, well, yeah, as we were saying, it's not really, it wasn't certainly, in the 90s when I was at university, a sort of known career path for any university students, really, Oxbridge or not. Obviously, for me, my father was in the trade show business from when I was a young child. And so that's really how I got into the business as well. And I came into the business to help out, for a launch show, which was the launch show of IMEX in Frankfurt back in 2002, 2003. And I had intended to just do that first show and then move on and do something else. But I really fell in love with it. So I stayed, and I could see that there was great opportunity, and it suited me well. And so, as with many people, I guess it was a little bit by accident, but I did have that pedigree in the sense of I had been going to trade shows that my father ran since probably the age of 6 or 7. So I had a bit of a fundamental understanding of what it was.
Yeah, yes, you were saying earlier about going to if you like, an employment a conference at your old college, and finding it quite difficult to persuade people that trade shows was a credible career.
Yes, absolutely. As we were saying, they have these little recruitment evenings for the undergraduates. And I was really an outlier. They know what journalism is. They know what banking is to a degree. They know what management consulting is. But trade shows and business events, which was what I was there to represent, I had the sort of, I got the people who really didn't know what they wanted. So it wasn't something they were seeking out. And so I think we've got a lot of work to get really the top students considering our industry and look at our industry as a viable career prospect and something that they should be aiming for, not falling into. We have a lot of work to do as an industry, and I'm not sure that we're really trying to do that yet.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I've been talking to various universities over the last few years about trying to set up courses, because actually, I mean, there's a lot of finance, There's a lot of marketing. There are all sorts of things which really ought to work with the business studies departments of a lot of universities, but it's been very, very, very hard work. It's a bit like DCMS. You go in there and you start talking about events and trade shows, and they look at you and say, "Well, do you mean weddings or do you mean Glastonbury?" It's a familiar complaint, but it's one that I find time and time again. Let's go on to the AEO. You've just become chairman of the AEO. Throw you a curveball. What's the AEO for?
Yeah, well, I think over the past couple of years, the AEO and other organisations as well, because I'm involved in many global organisations for the business events industry, have really shown what they are for. And it really has been so important as a voice for the industry with government and organisations like DCMS to really explain what we are for, and why they need to support the industry. But more than that, it's also been incredibly valuable, I think, for members to have a place to have honest, open conversations, to share knowledge, to share pain, and to support each other. And that's those sort of two components, I think, have been so important and valuable through the pandemic. And I think the fact that AEO has retained almost all of its members through this period is testament to the value of those two things in particular. And I guess it comes down to advocacy and community, and those two things are critical for the AEO and any good, solid trade association.
And what are the threats? I mean, what are the things that the AEO as an organisation, I'm not talking about the trade show industry as an industry per se, but the AEO as an organisation, what are the threats that the AEO faces in the short term?
Well, I think, any organisation at the moment, AEO is, one of them. We're very reliant on our events for revenue. So
absolutely.
that's obviously, a major threat. Our industry has been massively impacted. And so we know, and we're very cognizant and cautious and careful about, sponsorship dollars, if you like. And so the financials is one of the biggest threats. And then, a threat for any association is losing relevance. I don't think that the AEO is anywhere near that at the moment, but I think you've always got to keep your ear to the ground and keep close to the membership and what they need. And I think the other thing that's so important is making sure that we're guiding the membership as to what the next things on the horizon are for us to be looking at. So it's partly listening to members and partly helping to guide the industry to make sure that they're on the front foot for whatever's coming next. So those are really opportunities as well as threats, I suppose.
Okay, now let's talk about IMEX. You joined IMEX nearly 20 years ago now, I think. That's correct?
Absolutely. Yes, almost 20 years.
And if anybody could have been defined as being absolutely at the sharp end of the pandemic, then I think it's probably you. Not only events, not only trade shows, but also travel. And all of those elements. I mean, it almost came together. I know perfect storm is a cliche, so my apologies for using the cliche, but you are absolutely at the sharp end of the pandemic. What did you do to start with? How did you even begin to deal looking at this and obviously being able to recognize what it meant?
Yes, well, first I would say it moved very, very fast, as I think everybody knows. For us, I think the first things that we did in early March was to speak to our exhibitors, to speak to our buyers, and speak to our suppliers as well, to really try to understand what was going on in the world for them. We could see we were 2 months out from our Frankfurt show, so we know what we're expecting in terms of registrations and things like that. So we could see it go from a very normal cycle to a pause in a matter of 24 hours almost. The big thing for us really was because we work really in partnership, we feel, with our suppliers and also with our exhibitors. And we were very keen to make sure that they didn't have any wasted costs. And so we've very quickly worked out what our deadline dates were for making decisions based on what would be best for them, really. And so that really guided a lot of our thinking. And we came to a conclusion over the matter of a few days, really, that we could see that we couldn't guarantee a viable show for our exhibitors. We knew when they'd start sort of expending money that they couldn't get back, and we made the decision at that point to cancel the show. And the aftermath of that was challenging, of course, because we all have experience in building up to a show, but not in actually unpicking a show, and that was a challenge. And then we also made the decision to put on a virtual component, and that was far more challenging than any of us had expected. And the team did it in about 5 to 6 weeks, and it was an incredible feat what they managed. But we learned a lot, and we learned not to try to do that again.
And that's interesting. That's a very interesting admission. I mean, people, pivot to digital, of course, has become one of the terrible cliches of the period. But I mean, from what you were saying there, it's not as straightforward as people like to pretend.
No, not at all. It's a huge undertaking. It's a different skill set, which I think our team did it amazingly with, but it was a very steep learning curve. And we did do another digital event in the October, which, we had learned and changed and obviously had more time. And then this year we've done something very different again, still some, digital events and activations, but in a very different way. And we understand now what it takes. And, I look at it as broadcast. It's broadcasting, it's digital media, it's digital publishing, and those are totally different sort of skill sets, different build up. And so it's just learning a new business model in a sense, and working out, I suppose, the degree to which that business model fits with your existing one and needs to. And that's going to be different for every industry, I think.
Yeah, you and I were talking to Lee Newton a couple of days ago, and he was talking about what he was trying to do. I mean, we'll use the word digital in a very generic sense here, but he was very much of the opinion that you simply couldn't run it as part of your traditional business. That if there were opportunities, you had to treat it as a separate business and run it as a parallel business. I mean, would you agree with that? And do you think that has relevance to IMEX?
I totally agree with that. I think it is. I think there are, as I said, some transferable skills, and I think some members of the team are agile and can probably sit in both. But it is a totally different business, running sort of digital content, if you like, whatever that means, on a year-round basis is entirely different to running a trade show. And I think that works for some industries better than others. But ultimately, if you want to try to do that, I think it's important you see it as sufficiently different and run it as a different unit, if you like, within the business to really be successful. Because otherwise, you have to be honest about the fact that if you're going to play in that space, you're up against Netflix, you're up against Google, you're up against Facebook. So you better be really good at it, because there are other people who are very, very good at this. So I think you need to be clear about what your competition landscape is, and it's a much easier sort of route to market. So there's a big competition. So that's not to put people off it, but it's just to show the seriousness, I suppose, in which you need to take it, and not pretend it's just a Zoom call like this, which is great, but this on its own is not enough for a digital content strategy. No,
and there is a logic for people who are in the industry to listen to what you've got to say for 15 or 20 minutes. But this is this is not pivot to digital, is it? This is
no.
And interesting that you say there are plenty of people out there doing it, but I would have thought that in your particular sector, that was as true as of any sector. That, I mean, the quality of material that one can access in your particular sector is phenomenal.
Absolutely. Well, we have, multiple trade associations globally in the business event sector who are fantastic at education, certification programs, magazines. We also have 90 media partners globally that we partner with. So that just shows, and we partner with most of the trade publications in the business event sector. So that shows you just at a small level what's out there. And I think as trade show organisers, I think you have to be quite cognizant about your partnership. So for us, we're very careful not to tread on the toes of our partners. And so there's a fine line between us supporting them, putting out content ourselves and cannibalizing theirs. And so that is a fine line that, again, for different events, it means something different. But for an event like ours, where it works because of that sort of partnership matrix, we're very careful about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really difficult question, but I do ask quite a lot of people this. Let's go forward 2 or 3 years. Where do you think the industry, the trade show industry, will be in terms of pivot to digital? I'll use that phrase again. Do you actually think the trade show industry will look different because of the last 18 months, the last 2 years? Or do you think actually there may be people running parallel routes? But actually,
I actually, and I've said this since early on in the pandemic, I don't actually think when sort of the world goes back to more normality, and by that I mean less restrictions, travel being much easier, I don't think trade shows are going to look as different as people expect. I really don't. And I think that there's such a massive desire, whether you look at trade or consumer, to be together and to attend events and to have live in-person experiences, that I don't think events and trade shows will look so very different in themselves. However, I think there's been a massive learning curve within the industry. I think we're only just really learning what digital truly means and what data can really do for us. That's been talked about for probably a decade. We've all been talking about using data more, digital information services, and only very few organisers really got to grips with that before the pandemic. So I think those are the areas where we've learned a lot and where there'll be a lot of investment. So I think there will be more digital products, but I do see it as more of a enhancement, a diversification of business models, and probably, this idea of, especially if you look at IMEX, we have 2 shows in the same sector that run roughly 6 months apart. So how do we tie them together in a more cohesive way and bring value to our community and our exhibitors throughout the year, so that it's a more strategic relationship? I think there's some value in looking at that really closely. But that doesn't mean our actual shows, when they come together for those 3-4 days, are going to look significantly different. It's more about what we do in the middle, I think, that might change a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, you have a particular challenge. I mean, in my personal case, my companies, virtually all of my shows, even when they are in a whole range of different countries, they tend to be domestic. We have very, very little international business. You almost by definition are an international business, and therefore the challenge for you seems to be much greater for the foreseeable future. How do you see that working out? I mean, how are you dealing with Frankfurt, for instance, given travel restrictions?
Yeah, so travel, as you rightly say, that's our biggest challenge, and obviously the one that we have least control over. Our IMEX America show is due in November, and that's actually going, remarkably well. But it is an international show, but it is also more domestic than our Frankfurt show. And so we can be very confident in running that, even if it's not as international as we would like. Frankfurt actually is in April next year, so we're pretty quietly confident, I suppose, in it at the moment. In terms of running a show logistically, I think Germany has set out the sort of the guidance, and it's very clear, and our venue Messe Frankfurt's running shows successfully, so that's good. as long as EU travel from the US and from enough destinations is eased into Germany, or stays in the position it is roughly now, I feel very confident that we can run that show successfully. We cancelled this year's because travel was completely dead. But I think where we are right now, we're pretty comfortable that we can have a successful show in Frankfurt. But you're absolutely right. Our biggest issue is travel, because we've always said we're global shows on 2 continents. We're not regional shows, we're not domestic shows. It's all about bringing the global industry together. That is what we do. That is our USP. So travel is very important to us.
Do you think the world's got it in for you, having had the worst of just about everything as far as this pandemic's concerned?
I don't know. We never looked at it that way. I mean, it was, what I found has been amazing in our industry, as in the business events industry, is just how resilient it's been. It's been extraordinary to see it. And that's not to say there hasn't been immense pain. When you look at US travel has some figures where 50% of the job losses in the entirety of the United States were in the travel and hospitality sector. So it's been enormously painful for the industry, but the number of people that are still in the industry, the businesses that have managed to keep themselves going, has been amazing to see. So so I guess it was at the beginning, it was pretty scary, actually, to see the whole industry, not just your event, but an entire industry go down to, I think I saw back last Easter, I think they said the business events industry globally was at 2% capacity. So that, shows really what happened. But on the plus side, I do think that this period has shown the value of business events, the value of face-to-face trade shows. There's a pent-up demand. I was talking to a major agency owner yesterday from Germany. They're now starting to run their corporate events again in person. They've been doing a lot digitally. And he actually said, I think for a while it's going to swing the other way. So we've been all digital. He said, nobody wants digital now. They all want to be looking at live. And then at some point we'll come back to some kind of middle ground. But that just shows, the pent-up demand. It's human nature at the end of the day. So there are positives in that sense, and maybe there's also, for the trade show industry and business events, been a positive in the sense of us needing to get our story right, needing to really focus on advocacy to governments. Again, it's something we've talked about a lot, but we haven't done much about it. We haven't really invested in that here in the UK or globally. And so I think there can be a positive legacy if we continue down that path. And so when you go into government, people don't ask you what it is that the trade show industry does. I mean, that would be a good legacy to have from this.
That would be a great start, wouldn't it? Thank you, Carina. I can't think of anybody more articulate and optimistic to be the chairman of the AEO in its 100th year. And of course, you will be the chairman at the 100th anniversary celebration, which I look forward to. And so we'll put a plug in for that now, shall we? December the 10th at the NEC, the AEO's 100th anniversary celebration. Please go onto the website. Please book your tickets. Carina will look forward to welcoming you there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carina.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.